There was a time early in my watch collecting odyssey, a time even when I owned some luxury watches, but I often thought, Seiko makes me happier than any other watches. I don't think I need to own any other brand. At the time I had a bunch of Seikos, an SKX007, a Marine Master, a SPB121 Alpinist, probably some that I'm forgetting. The variety, the history, the price, I think especially the price of these watches, for me, made them more fun than more expensive watches. I don't know, I think the higher the price, the more serious watch collecting can become, and I'm not a serious person and I don't want to be. So Seiko prices, let's say under $2,000, were my happy place, but I was never able to go all Seiko with my collection. But I never lost that happy place for Seiko watches, so when Exquisite Timepieces asked me what fancy watch I wanted to borrow for a video, I looked through the dozens of brands they carry, some of them pretty expensive and pretty exclusive, but like a moth to an affordable flame with occasional wick alignment issues, I was drawn back to these, Seiko and the Alpinist watches. What we have here are two from the latest generation of Alpinist watches, the green SPB121 and the black SPB337. This one is also known as the Night Vision. The Alpinist watches go back a long way to 1959, a simpler time when men's watches were small and their hats were big and they wore suits of armor and rode dinosaurs. Okay, I'm not great with history, but I prefer the more modern looking Alpinist watches like these. And there have been some really badass Alpinist watches in the last 30 years. Weird, fun, affordable stuff that most people have never seen. Like the quartz Alpinist watches that use the high-accuracy 8F56 perpetual calendar GMT movements. Amazing pieces, and maybe a little too collectible these days. Prices have gone over $1,000 for some of these. And even before the quartz watches were the automatic Alpinist SCVF watches, which I think were the first Alpinist watches with the cathedral hour hands. A pretty chunk thick cathedral hour hand. And some questionable typography at the bottom of the dial, but I do like that red text. The green SCVF watch was clearly the inspiration for the green SPB121 that I have here, but Seiko keeps making more Alpinists, which is good because I like watches, but it's also bad because I like watches. The latest generation of these watches came out in 2020, but this black one, this Night Vision, came out in 2023. If it's not clear, these two watches share most of the same specs. 39.5 millimeters in diameter, 13.2 millimeters thick, 46.4 millimeters long, and with 20 millimeter lugs. They have 200 meters of water resistance, 87 grams on a leather strap with a deployant buckle, and 147 grams on a bracelet. Both watches use the 6R35 Seiko movement and has 70 hours of power reserve, and both watches use sapphire crystals. The green SPB121 lists for $750 and the black Night Vision SPB337 lists for $925, but it's increasingly tough to find because this is a limited edition. Now, when I hear that a watch is a limited edition of 5,500 pieces, I usually scoff. I say, I scoff at you, sir or madam. But with a brand as big as Seiko, 5,500 watches will eventually sell out, and this is pretty close to doing that. And I know for some of us older Seiko fans, $925 for an Alpinist is tough to get your head around. I bought my SPB121 100 years ago and added a bracelet separately, and the total cost was like $425. But this is the new way, and the sales of these watches tell me and tell Seiko that the pricing is not deterring buyers, so sorry. That's me saying sorry. Seiko is most definitely not sorry. These are called Alpinist watches, mountaineering timepieces. Not really, but that's the vibe, I guess. And the closest major mountain to me is the active volcano Mount Hood. It's 11,249 feet tall, which you know means that my wrist circumference is 5.1856 times 10 to the negative 5th Mount Hoods. For you indoor types, that's 7 inches. My wrist is 7 inches around. 39.5 millimeters on a 7-inch wrist. Great size, no notes. I don't know what else to say, it's good. Even the 13 millimeter thickness is totally fine. But I'm sure there's going to be at least one person in the comments who says they won't consider a watch that's smaller than 45 millimeters. And to that person I ask, who hurt you and what led you down the path of seeking help in the comments section of a watch video? Both options here are pretty comfortable. The deploying clasp is fine. It's actually better than I expected from a $700 watch. I've seen some affordable deploying clasps that are uncomfortable and sharp, and while they remind me of myself, nobody needs more of that in their lives. The bracelet on the night vision is also fine. It uses pins to hold the links together, no collars, just pins, unless I lost the collars without realizing it, which would not be the first time, but pretty sure it's just pins. The bracelet has 2 micro adjustment spots. I haven't really needed them myself. Seiko does not say what coating technology it's using to make this watch black. PVD, DLC, a whole lot of Sharpies. Seiko just says that the watch has a super hard coating. I haven't seen reports of this coating failing, like I haven't seen or heard about chipping or flaking, so I assume it's DLC. And it does seem to give the watch a lot of scratch resistance. I won't say how I know that, but I'm just gonna say that I do know that. The watches are powered by the Seiko 6R35 movement. Like I said, it has 70 hours of power reserve. That's really the big upgrade from the previous generation of Alpinist watches, from 50 hours to 70 hours. All these watches have exhibition case backs, but of course the black one has smoked glass. This is a thing both Seiko and Grand Seiko love to do. Show you a watch movement, but make it really tough to see, especially on limited edition pieces. It's like horological lingerie. You get a peek, but that's all. Some of you might be into this, but I roll natural. The whole design of the Alpinist watches is weird, not bad, not to me, but when you look at all the elements individually, it's kind of surprising that all these parts come together to a pretty handsome and cohesive unit. Remind you of anyone? Starting from the outside, there are 2 crowns. The crown at 3 o'clock is to adjust the time and date, and the crown at 4 o'clock is for adjusting the inner bezel. The inner bezel is a compass bezel. If you have the correct time on your watch and you know what hemisphere you're in, north or south, you can kind of use the bezel to determine the cardinal directions. Kind of, not really. Honestly, if you know the time and the time of year and where you are in the world, you can probably just figure out which way is north or south without the compass bezel. But it's not just enough to have a cool watch. You have to make an argument that it's somehow a survival instrument because everyone's got to be Tenzin Norgay or something. Then there are the numerals, only even numerals and rotated radially, with triangular shaped markers between each of them. This generation of Alpinist watches brought back the Cyclops, the date magnifier. I assume this is a controversial design element. I'm assuming and not investigating, because I don't have the emotional strength to read nerds' rage posts about a 4mm piece of plastic on a watch that nobody needs. And then there are those cathedral hands that I mentioned earlier. What a strange choice. The original purpose of cathedral hands was to hold lume in place, just like the Mercedes hands on a lot of Rolex watches. It's structural for the lume, or at least it used to be. And the lume on these is pretty good. I half expected the night vision watch to have weaker lume, because in the daylight the lume has a intentional green color, but in the dark both watches glow brightly using Seiko's Lumabrite material. It's been 10 years since I owned a Seiko Alpinist, and when I owned one I didn't really wear it much. That's why I sold it. But unfortunately, borrowing these watches from Exquisite Timepieces has got me thinking. I really enjoyed wearing these watches, and in my research for this video, looking at some of the older Alpinist watches and looking at the huge selection that Seiko is now making. Man, some of these are looking really good to me, and that's the trouble with making videos about watches that you like. It can be dangerous. This better not awaken anything in me.